The contract that began with a lie and ended with a promise. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main characters. It all started on a rainy night in New York City, the kind of night when thunder hides behind skyscrapers and every streetlight looks like a secret waiting to be told. Inside a small coffee shop near Madison Avenue, Ethan Carter sat alone in a tailored gray suit, his eyes fixed on the raindrops racing down the window. He was 35, the CEO of Helix Media, and to the world, he looked unshakable. But tonight, his empire felt like it was hanging by a thread. Tomorrow morning, the board of directors would vote on his future. There was one condition for him to stay in power: he had to be married before the end of the month. The scandal that had taken his fiancée years ago still haunted the tabloids, and the investors wanted proof that he had rebuilt his image. Across town, Lily Tran hurried through the rain, clutching a thin portfolio to her chest. She was 25, a freelance artist who painted portraits in Central Park for tourists and dreamed of opening her own studio one day. Her landlord had given her a final warning: pay the rent or leave by Monday. Her mother's hospital bills were stacking up, and hope was something she could barely afford anymore. The bell above the cafe door chimed as she stepped in, shivering, her coat soaked through. She only wanted to sit, warm her hands, maybe sketch a little before heading back into the storm. When she looked up, her eyes met Ethan's. For a moment, time slowed. The quiet hum of jazz, the scent of coffee, the reflection of neon on wet glass. He saw in her something unpolished but real, something the corporate world had long stripped away from him. "Excuse me," she said softly, noticing the empty seat across from him. "Is this taken?" He looked at her for a long second, then shook his head. "No, please." She smiled, grateful, unaware that this single decision to sit with a stranger was about to change both of their lives. Minutes turned into an hour as the storm outside deepened. They spoke in small pieces: art, work, the city, the weight of dreams. Ethan did not tell her who he was. For the first time in years, he liked being just a man, not a CEO under glass. Then, a message lit up his phone: board ultimatum confirmed. Marriage proof required. He stared at it, jaw tightening. His mind spun, calculating, desperate. Lily was talking about a mural she wanted to paint at a children's hospital when he suddenly interrupted. "Miss Tran," he said quietly, "I am going to ask you something that will sound insane." She blinked. "Go on." He leaned forward, his voice low, steady, but trembling under the surface. "Marry me. Think of it as a contract." Silence filled the cafe, broken only by the rain. Lily laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But his eyes did not move. "You are serious," she whispered. "Completely," he said. "You need money, and I need a wife temporarily. 6 months. No strings, no emotions, only terms we both agree on. You will be paid, your debts cleared, and when it is over, you walk away free." Lily stared at him, her heart pounding louder than the storm outside. Everything about this sounded wrong. But then she thought of her mother, of eviction, of the hospital calling again. "Why me?" she asked. "Because," Ethan said softly, "you are the first person I have met in a long time who did not ask for anything from me." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "Show me the contract." He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a crisp folder. Between them lay a document that looked like salvation and disaster at once. The clock ticked past midnight as she signed her name with shaking hands. When she looked up, he was already watching her, the stormlight flickering across his face. "You just changed both our lives," he said quietly. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like applause for a deal that neither of them would ever truly understand, at least, not yet. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and shining beneath the early light. Lily awoke in her small apartment, the contract from the night before lying on her kitchen table beside a cold cup of tea. Her hands still trembled when she looked at her signature on the paper. It was real. She had married Ethan Carter, the CEO of Helix Media. Somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief, she whispered to herself, "What have I done?" Her phone buzzed. A short message appeared, "Driver at 9 a.m. Be ready." She barely had time to gather her things before a black car pulled up outside. The driver greeted her politely, taking her worn suitcase and leading her into the quiet interior of the car. As they drove through the city, Lily stared out the window, watching the skyline rise higher and sharper with every mile. The contrast between her world and his felt like two different planets. The car turned through iron gates and stopped in front of a mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. Tall columns framed the entrance, and marble steps glistened in the sunlight. Ethan stood waiting near the doorway, dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," he said evenly. The title sent a chill through her. "You do not have to call me that," she replied quietly. "But it is what you are, at least for now," he answered, holding the door open. Inside, the house was all glass and stone, silent except for the echo of their footsteps. A housekeeper appeared, guiding Lily to a guest room that looked larger than her entire apartment. On the bed lay an envelope with her name in elegant handwriting. Inside were the official terms of their agreement: 6 months, 5 public appearances, and absolute discretion. Ethan's signature was below hers, neat and controlled. That afternoon, she found him in his study surrounded by shelves of business books and framed awards. "I read the rules," she said, standing by the door. "Good," he replied without looking up. "Then follow them, and we will both get what we need." "And what if I break one?" she asked. He finally met her eyes. "Then the deal ends. No payment. No promises." His voice was calm, but the warning beneath it was unmistakable. For the next few days, Lily was introduced to Ethan's world. A stylist adjusted her wardrobe, teaching her how to walk, how to smile, how to answer questions at events. A public relations manager handed her flashcards with details about Helix Media's charities and partners. "You will need these," the woman said. "The first gala is on Friday." When Lily saw herself in the mirror that evening, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress shimmered silver under the lights, her hair swept into perfect waves, her eyes outlined with quiet strength. Yet beneath the elegance, her heart was restless. At dinner that night, the long dining table stretched between them like a frozen river. Ethan spoke briefly about schedules, about image, about precision. She listened, nodding, trying not to spill the water in her glass. "You do not have to be nervous," he said finally, noticing her hands. "I am not," she lied. He smiled faintly, seeing through her. "You are terrible at lying." "Then it is a good thing this marriage started with one," she replied, her tone soft but sharp enough to make him pause. For the first time, something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "Touché," he said. Later that night, Lily stood by the window of her new room, staring at the city lights below. She thought of her mother in the hospital, of the bills waiting to be paid, and of the man she had just promised to live beside for 6 months. Somewhere deep down, she felt the edges of her life shifting. She had entered his world to survive, but something told her that surviving might not be the hardest part. In the quiet of the mansion, she whispered to herself, "I will not let this change who I am." And in his study down the hall, Ethan looked at the same city skyline, wondering why he suddenly could not stop thinking about the woman who had signed his contract under the rain. Friday arrived faster than Lily expected. The morning sun spilled through the tall glass windows of the mansion, catching the soft gold in her hair as she adjusted a pair of earrings that were worth more than her entire life savings. The house buzzed quietly with preparation. Stylists moved like shadows, steaming gowns, fixing curls, and reminding her of the evening's schedule. The Helix Foundation Gala was not just another event, it was the first public appearance for Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Carter. In a matter of hours, hundreds of reporters and investors would see them together for the first time. Lily tried to breathe, but the corset of the gown pressed against her ribs. When Ethan appeared in the doorway, dressed in a sleek black tuxedo, she froze. He looked composed, distant, untouchable. For a moment she wondered if the man from the cafe, the one who had looked at her with something close to warmth, had ever truly existed. "Ready?" he asked simply. "As I will ever be," she replied, forcing a smile. The drive to the Midtown Grand Hotel felt endless. Outside the car window, the city glittered like it knew the world was watching. Inside, silence sat heavy between them. When they finally arrived, camera flashes burst like lightning. Ethan stepped out first, offering his hand with the practiced grace of a man who had lived his whole life under spotlights. Lily took it hesitantly, her heels touching the red carpet. The air filled with the click of cameras and the sharp hum of voices. "Mr. Carter, who is your wife wearing?" "Mrs. Carter, how does it feel to be married to one of New York's most powerful men?" The questions flew, but she answered softly, politely, her voice steady even as her heart raced. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glittered like constellations above a sea of black suits and champagne gowns. Music drifted through the air, elegant and distant. Ethan guided her through the crowd, introducing her to business partners and board members. She smiled when she needed to, nodded when expected, and tried to remember every name. When she finally escaped to the refreshment table, she saw a little girl stumble and fall near the edge of the dance floor. The crowd barely noticed. Without thinking, Lily hurried over, kneeling beside the child and brushing the dust from her dress. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked gently. The girl nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Lily smiled and pulled a napkin from the table, folding it into the shape of a small bird. "There, a lucky crane. Keep it with you tonight." The child's frown melted into a smile, and somewhere in the distance, Ethan watched. Later that night, as the music softened, he approached her. "You handled yourself well," he said quietly. "Even with the press." "And that girl." Lily blushed. "I did not do anything special." "That is exactly why it was special," he replied, his tone gentler than she had ever heard. They stood there for a few seconds longer than necessary, the noise of the ballroom fading to a hum. But before she could respond, a photographer called out, "One more photo, Mr. and Mrs. Carter." Ethan hesitated only a moment before placing a hand lightly on her waist. Flash. The camera caught them mid-smile, his eyes on her instead of the lens. That picture would appear on the front page the next morning under the headline, "The Kind Wife Ethan Carter's Marriage Rewrites His Image." The following week, the entire city was talking about her. Magazine covers, morning shows, online articles, they all called her the woman who softened the ruthless CEO. Ethan said little, only reminding her to stay composed. But late one evening, Lily passed his office door and heard him on the phone. His voice was sharp, tired. "No, I do not care about the headlines," he said. "Just keep them away from her." That single sentence stopped her in her tracks. He was protecting her. For reasons she did not understand, that realization made her chest tighten. The next day, as she painted alone in the guest room to calm her nerves, Ethan appeared at the door. "You paint," he said, surprised. She smiled faintly. "It is what I did before all of this." He studied the canvas soft strokes of city lights melting into rain. "You should keep doing it," he said. Then he added, "Maybe one day you will show me what it means to see the world like that." His words lingered long after he left the room. And for the first time since signing that contract, Lily felt something she had not expected to feel in this house: hope. Weeks passed, and Lily's life in the Carter mansion slowly shifted from strangeness to rhythm. Every morning, she woke to the smell of fresh coffee prepared by the staff, the quiet hum of city life beyond the tall windows. She still painted in the afternoons, setting up her small easel in the sunroom that overlooked the garden. Ethan often worked late, his days consumed by meetings and negotiations, yet somehow, he always appeared at dinner, never early, never late. Their conversations began as formal courtesies about events and obligations, but little by little, something softer crept in. One night, as rain tapped against the glass walls, she asked, "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" Ethan paused over his wine, eyes fixed on the reflection of lightning outside. "Every day," he said quietly. "But sometimes lies are easier to live with than truth." Lily held his gaze, feeling the weight behind his words. "Then maybe you just need a better truth," she said, smiling faintly. He looked away, hiding the hint of a smile that threatened to break his composure. The next morning, his driver dropped her off at a fashion charity event. It was one of the 5 appearances in their contract. Lily stepped out, her silver dress shimmering like morning dew, and waved politely as cameras clicked. Inside, she spoke with donors, her warmth disarming even the most cynical of socialites. Meanwhile, Ethan stood across the room, watching her from a distance. She was no longer the frightened girl who had signed a desperate deal. She moved with quiet confidence, speaking about art, about using creativity to heal people. When she mentioned her dream of funding a children's art program, investors leaned in, charmed. After the event, as the guests dispersed, Ethan found her alone near the exit, her heels dangling from her hand. "You were impressive," he said. "They loved you." She laughed softly. "They loved the dress." "Do not give the credit to me." "I am serious," he insisted. "You have something I do not. People believe you." The compliment hung between them, fragile but real. Later that night, a storm rolled through the city again. Lily sat by the fireplace with her sketchbook, lost in thought, when Ethan entered the room carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You are not working tonight?" she asked. "The market will still exist tomorrow," he said, handing her a cup. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire dance. Then, unexpectedly, Ethan began to speak about his past, the woman he had been engaged to before. "Her name was Claire," he said, voice low. "She was brilliant, fearless. But the media tore her apart after one false headline. I thought keeping silent would protect her. I was wrong." His hand tightened around the cup. "She died in a car accident a week later." Lily's chest ached at the confession. "You blame yourself," she said softly. "Wouldn't you?" he replied. The room fell quiet again, only the fire crackling between them. Without thinking, Lily reached out and placed her hand over his. "You cannot rewrite what happened," she whispered, "but you can choose what you become because of it." For a long moment, Ethan did not move. Then, slowly, his fingers relaxed beneath hers. "You make it sound easy," he said. "It is not easy," she replied. "It is just possible." The next day, Ethan cancelled his meetings. He took Lily to the rooftop garden at Helix Tower, a private place that overlooked the entire skyline. "You once said you paint what you want the world to see," he said. "What would you paint now?" She turned to him, wind tugging at her hair. "This," she answered. "The moment before something changes." He nodded, the faintest smile touching his lips. As they stood together above the city, the line between truth and pretense blurred completely. For the first time since their marriage began, neither of them felt like they were acting. And somewhere deep inside, both understood that the contract which had once been about survival was slowly becoming something neither of them could control, something real. By the time autumn painted New York in gold, the contract had entered its 4th month, yet the line between duty and desire had completely faded. Lily and Ethan were no longer 2 strangers bound by paper but 2 souls orbiting each other in dangerous proximity. Their days blended into quiet routines: morning coffee together, shared glances at charity events, and long evenings in the sunroom where she painted while he worked nearby in silence. Sometimes their eyes met, and neither spoke, as if words would break the fragile peace between them. But peace never lasts forever. One evening, as they prepared for a corporate dinner with Helix investors, tension found its way back. "Remember," Ethan said, adjusting his tie in the mirror, "tonight is important. The board will be watching us." Lily turned from her reflection, her patience thin. "You mean they will be watching me?" she said. Because I make you look less human on paper. Ethan frowned. That is not fair. Neither is any of this, she replied. Before he could respond, the driver announced their arrival. The dinner was a shimmering display of wealth crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and laughter that never reached anyone's eyes. Lily played her role flawlessly, smiling and answering polite questions, but as the night wore on, exhaustion crept in. When one of the investors, a silver-haired man with too much charm and too little respect, placed a hand on her back and whispered something suggestive, Ethan's jaw tightened. In a voice that silenced the room, he said, "I suggest you remove your hand." The man stammered an apology, retreating, but the damage was done. The crowd whispered. Cameras flashed. Lily could feel the headlines writing themselves. On the ride home, silence pressed heavy between them. "You did not have to do that," she said. "It will only feed rumors." "He disrespected you," Ethan replied. "That is not about rumors. That is about respect. And now the entire city will think you are defending your fake wife," she snapped. His hands gripped the steering wheel. "Maybe I am tired of pretending she is fake." The car stopped abruptly at a red light. Their eyes met, the truth raw and undeniable. But before either could say another word, his phone buzzed. The screen flashed with a message, "URGN press leak about contract marriage." By morning, the story had broken. Every news outlet in the city carried the same headline, "Helix CEO's marriage exposed as a contract." Photos from the gala, from the dinner, from the cafe where they had first met filled the screens. The world knew everything or thought it did. Reporters surrounded the mansion gates, shouting questions. Lily could barely step outside. Inside, Ethan paced his office, fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. "It was someone inside the company," he said through clenched teeth. "A leak planted to ruin us before the merger." "Then what happens now?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, and for the first time, his mask slipped. "You could walk away. I will take the blame." "You think that would fix anything," she said, her voice trembling. "I agreed to this, Ethan. I knew what I was signing." "Yes," he said softly, "but you did not sign up to be destroyed." The next day, she watched from the balcony as reporters shouted her name below. For a moment, fear clawed at her throat, but then she remembered something he had said weeks ago, "People believe you." She took a deep breath and stepped forward, facing the cameras. "The rumors are true," she said clearly, her voice steady. "Our marriage began as a contract. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. Believe what you want, but know this: I do not regret signing that paper." The crowd erupted with questions, flashes blinding her eyes, but she held her ground. Inside, Ethan watched from the window, a mix of pride and heartbreak in his eyes. Later that night, when the world outside finally quieted, he found her standing alone in the darkened hallway. "That was reckless," he said. "It was honest," she replied. He stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "You are going to ruin me." "Maybe," she said, "but at least it will be real this time." For a heartbeat, they stood in silence, and then Ethan reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then let us face it together." Somewhere beyond the walls of the mansion, the world was still shouting their names, but for the first time, neither of them cared. The scandal did not fade overnight. For days, Helix Media became the center of every talk show, every headline, every whispered conversation in the upper floors of New York's business towers. Ethan's board demanded answers, and Lily's name was dragged through endless speculation. Still, inside the mansion, a strange calm began to take hold. After her public statement, people had seen something real in her grace under fire, quiet strength, the kind of truth that could not be faked. The same reporters who had once called her a fraud were now calling her the woman who stood her ground. Ethan watched the shift happen with silent awe, though he never said so aloud. One evening, after another long day of damage control, he found Lily sitting in the garden under soft strings of light, sketching on her lap. "You should be resting," he said, his voice tired but gentle. She looked up and smiled faintly. Resting does not stop the world from talking. Maybe not, he said, sitting beside her, but you have handled it better than I ever could. She glanced at him, then returned to her drawing. You built an empire, Ethan. You can handle anything. Except this, he murmured. Except you. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken truth. The contract that had started as survival had become something far more dangerous, something neither of them could label anymore. Days later, Ethan received notice of an emergency board meeting. Rumors spread that several executives were planning to vote him out as CEO, claiming his personal scandal had tarnished the company. He knew what had to be done. That night, he walked into Lily's studio, where unfinished canvases lined the walls. It is time, he said. For what? She asked, brushing paint from her hands. For you to be free. He held out a folder. Their contract. If you leave now, before the meeting, I can tell them the marriage ended, that it was all my idea. They will protect you, and I will take the fall. Lily stared at him, shock and disbelief in her eyes. You would destroy yourself for me? I have already destroyed enough people for my ambition, he said quietly. Maybe it is time I make a different choice. She shook her head, tears welling. I do not want your pity, Ethan. I want your honesty. You have it, he said, his voice breaking. Somewhere along the way, I stopped pretending. For a moment, neither moved. Then she stepped forward and closed the folder, her hand trembling over his. If you think I am walking away now, you are wrong, she whispered. The next morning, they arrived at the Helix Tower together. The boardroom was filled with cold stares and colder voices. Mr. Carter, one director said, your recent scandal has caused significant financial risk. The only responsible decision is for you to step down. Ethan stood calmly. If I have learned anything from this, it is that an empire built on fear and image means nothing. I will step down if that is what you all decide, but I will not apologize for loving someone who reminded me what humanity looks like. Murmurs spread through the room, some shocked, some moved. Lily, seated at the end of the table, met his eyes. The vote began. It was close, too close, but in the end, Ethan's integrity swayed just enough hearts to keep him in power. Afterward, when the room emptied, he turned to her. You did not have to stay. Neither did you, she replied. Outside, the city stretched endlessly below them, lights glowing like 1,000 promises. That night, back at the mansion, Ethan poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her. To surviving lies, he said. She smiled softly. And to telling the truth anyway. He hesitated before asking, if you could do it all over again, would you still sign that contract? Lily looked at him, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. Only if you would ask me again. Ethan laughed quietly, shaking his head. Then I would. Their glasses clinked, a quiet toast to a love that had risen from the wreckage of deceit. And as the rain began to fall once more outside the window, it no longer sounded like a storm, it sounded like forgiveness. For a while, it seemed as though peace had finally found them. The board meeting ended without further scandal. The press had grown tired of their story, and for the first time in months, the mansion felt like a home instead of a battlefield. Lily continued painting, filling the sunroom with colors that caught light differently depending on the hour. Ethan often worked beside her, his laptop open but his focus slipping whenever she smiled. They had fallen into a rhythm neither dared to name. But peace, as always, was temporary. One morning, Ethan's assistant arrived with news that froze him mid-breath. A major investor, the same man he had confronted for touching Lily, had filed a lawsuit accusing Helix Media of fraud. It was a lie designed to destroy him and her. Within hours, headlines roared again. Helix CEO faces allegations of financial misconduct, mystery wife tied to internal leak. The words cut deeper than before. Lily watched the story unfold on television, her heart sinking as her name appeared beside his. When Ethan came home that evening, his face was pale but controlled. Do not read any of it, he said. It is just noise. But they are saying I leaked documents, she whispered. You know that is not true. I know, he said, stepping closer. And I will prove it. How? She asked. By telling them everything? He hesitated. If that is what it takes. Ethan, if you tell them about the contract, then they will see it started as business, he interrupted, but became something else. His voice softened. Something worth protecting. Days turned into chaos. Investigators swarmed the Helix offices, lawyers circled like vultures, and the company's stock began to fall. Ethan refused to hide, meeting every accusation hidden. But one night, Lily overheard a conversation that shattered her composure. A man from the boardroom was on speakerphone, saying, if she walks away, the case dies. The press will move on. She is the weak link, Ethan. She stood silently outside the door, tears burning her eyes. The next morning, before he woke, she packed a small bag and left a letter on his desk. In it, she wrote, You once told me lies were easier to live with than truth. I cannot be your reason to lose everything. You need to fight this without me. When Ethan found the letter, his chest tightened until he could hardly breathe. He searched every corner of the house, called her phone again and again, but it went straight to voicemail. That night, the mansion felt emptier than ever before. The sound of rain echoed against the windows, the same way it had the night they met. In the quiet, he realized that the woman who had entered his life as part of a deal had become the only thing real in it. And now she was gone. Somewhere across the city, in a small rented studio, Lily stared at a blank canvas, tears mixing with the paint on her hands. She whispered to herself, You said you wanted to protect me. But maybe I was supposed to protect you, too. 2 weeks passed, and the world moved on as if their story had been nothing more than a headline. But Ethan did not move on. He threw himself into work, his face on the covers of business magazines again, this time as the man fighting to save his company from collapse. Yet every victory felt hollow. Each night he returned to the mansion, its hallways echoing with absence, her laughter still clinging to the walls like a haunting melody. Lily, meanwhile, had built a quiet life in Brooklyn, renting a small studio above a bakery. She painted again, not for clients, not for survival, but because it was the only way to breathe. Still, she could not bring herself to paint his face. She tried, once, and the image of him blurred under her brush until the canvas turned gray. One morning, she received a message from an unknown number, gallery invitation, The Art of Lily Tran. Confused, she read the details. It was a showcase at a small but respected Manhattan gallery. She had not submitted anything. Thinking it was a mistake, she called the curator, who only said, The sponsor insisted you attend. It will make sense when you see it. Curiosity and something deeper pulled her back to the city she had tried to forget. That evening, she entered the gallery quietly, her heart pounding. The walls were lined with her own paintings, pieces she had abandoned in her old studio, somehow found, restored, and displayed under perfect light. But at the center of the room hung a single new piece she had never painted. It was a portrait of her standing in the rain, clutching a contract that blurred into a heart. The title beneath it read, Promises We Keep. And below that, in small letters, by Ethan Carter. Her breath caught. He had painted it himself. When she turned, he was there, standing near the doorway, no longer the sharp-edged CEO but a man stripped of armor. How did you, she began, but he shook his head gently. You left pieces of yourself everywhere, Lily. I just put them together. The crowd around them faded into silence as he stepped closer. I never meant for this to be our ending, he said softly. The board cleared me last week. The lawsuit was dropped. But none of it mattered without you. Her voice trembled. You built an entire gallery just to say that? No, he said, his eyes glimmering with sincerity. I built it to give back what you gave May a reason to feel again. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he reached into his pocket and placed a small silver key in her hand. It is the key to the penthouse. The same one you left behind. I thought I would never see it again, but it belongs to you more than it ever did to me. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the painting, the key, then at him. You always did make promises you were not supposed to, she whispered. Then let me make one more, he said. No contracts. No lies. Just us. The crowd around them began to applaud quietly, the sound soft and warm like the first hint of dawn. Lily smiled through her tears. You really are impossible, Ethan Carter. Maybe, he said, smiling back. But I am yours if you will have me. The gallery lights dimmed as the evening came to a close, but neither Ethan nor Lily moved. The crowd had thinned, leaving behind only the faint sound of a violin playing from the speakers and the soft hum of the city outside. They stood in front of the painting that had brought them back together, the one titled, Promises We Keep. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Lily broke the silence, her voice trembling with emotion. When I first met you, I thought everything about you was built on control and distance, she said. I never imagined the man behind it was capable of this. Ethan smiled faintly. Neither did I. You taught me that love is not about power, it is about presence. You reminded me what it means to stand still long enough to feel something real. He took her hand gently, his touch warm and certain. Lily, I cannot promise a perfect life. I cannot promise we will never fight or fall apart again. But I can promise this: I will never hide behind contracts, lies, or fear. From now on, everything I give you will be real. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. Then let us start with one truth, she whispered. I never stopped loving you. Even when I left, I was painting you in every color I could not name. Ethan's throat tightened as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple silver ring, engraved with tiny words that read, No more lies. This time, he said softly, no signatures, no terms, just a promise. Lily's lips trembled as he slipped the ring onto her finger. The gallery erupted in quiet applause, a few guests still lingering by the door, but the world seemed to fade until there was only them. Outside, rain began to fall again, gentle and cleansing, the same way it had on the night they met. Ethan took her hand and led her to the glass doors overlooking the street. You know, he said, smiling as they watched the rain hit the pavement, it feels like we have come full circle. Except this time, she replied, I am not running away. He looked at her, the woman who had changed everything, and whispered, Neither am I. Months later, the world would learn about their quiet wedding ceremony held in that same gallery, surrounded by art and friends instead of reporters and contracts. On one of the walls hung a new painting Lily had finished just days before. It showed two figures walking hand in hand under an umbrella, their faces turned toward each other, their steps light, their world drenched in color. Beneath it, in gold letters, were the words, the contract that began with a lie and ended with a promise. And as guests admired the artwork, Ethan whispered to Lily, we were never meant to be a business deal. We were meant to be the exception. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder as the music swelled around them. And that, she said softly, was the best mistake we ever made. The rain outside shimmered beneath the city lights, falling not as a storm but as a blessing, washing away everything false and leaving behind only the true, the love that began with a lie and ended with a promise kept.